Okay, we're going to learn all about slope for pre-algebra or 8th grade math. All right, you remember, you've probably already learned this before, but we have a graph. And the line that goes up and down or vertical, we call the y-axis. And the line that goes left to right is like the horizon, we call the x-axis. Now, we want to identify lines, and for our purpose, we're going to use a linear line, and we want to say, okay, if it has some sort of angle to it, we want to identify what is that degree, what is that slope of that line, or how much it's leaning. If it leans to the right, we want to say, okay, how quickly is y changing in comparison to how quickly x is changing? And that's really where we get the slope from. So we can identify slope as the change in y over the change in x. All right, you also might see these little symbols here. You might see it written like that, the change in y over the change in x. Slope a lot of times is identified by m. And you might see m equals the change in y over the change in x. Well, what is the change in y? The change in y is how we are rising or falling. So for rising, we have a positive y. For falling, we have a negative y. Because the center line is the origin, it's 0, 0. Heading up, we get positive. Heading down, we get negative. That is over what we call the change in x. If we head to the right from the origin, we get positive. If we head to the left from the origin, we get negative. So it just depends on what's going on here to where we'll finally get a positive or negative answer. So change in y over change in x, or sometimes people say the rise over the run. And I like to tell my kids, if I go up, I'm rising up. If I go down, I'm sitting down. That's the rise over the run. And you can just imagine a little guy here. He's running left to right on this horizontal road. So it's either the rise over the run, the change in y, or over the change in x. And we call all of those things slope. All right, so the next thing we're going to ask ourselves is, how do we identify slope from 2 points? All right, so imagine that this is our line, okay, and we're just going to pretend we've passed through the origin here. And we're going to pick 2 points. So let's say that our line hits. Now you also have to remember that when we write a point, we write the x first and then the y. So the first number that I put is going to be coordinating with my x-axis. So I'm going to say my point goes through -1, -1. And my point also goes through, we'll say, 1, 1. Okay, now we want to take the y's, remember it's the change in y, and we want to subtract them to get the change or the difference. And then we want to take the y, the x's, and we want to subtract those to get the change in that. So we have a formula for that, and it is the second y minus the first y over the second x minus the first x. Okay, so here we have slope is equal to the second y minus the first y over the second x minus the first x. And you will see that creates the difference or the change between those 2 points. All right, so what are those values here? I know it's kind of messy to see, but this one is 1, 1. And this one is -1, 1. So let's plug those in. Y2 is 1. Y 1 is -1. So we're going to minus a -1. Okay, we're going to put that all over x2 minus x1. x2 is 1 and minus a -1. Okay, so when we minus a minus, we can plus. And so 1 minus a minus is really 1 plus 1. So we have 1 plus 1, right? And then this is the same thing on the bottom, 1 plus 1, and we get 2 over 2, and we know 2 over 2 makes 1. All right, so our slope or our change is equal to 1. We have a 1-to-1. For every 1 rise, we get 1 run. For every 1 rise, we get 1 run. That is what we have for slope. Now let's talk about what slope is going to look at. Some general characteristics of slope. We did a positive slope, all right, and you'll notice that positive slopes here, they lean to the right of the axis. You'll see that, okay? They lean. So we're going to say slope or change in y over change in x is going to be positive when we have this lean to the right. All right, that's one characteristic of slope when it is positive. The characteristic of slope when it is negative is that it tends to lean to the left here, because now we're moving into the negative quadrant. X is heading in a negative direction here, okay? Y is still positive, but X is heading negative, and now we get this leaning this way, okay? So here, M, the change in Y over the change in X is negative. So those are some general things that we notice about slope. Now remember, it's this degree of leaning. But if you have a line that is straight up and down, do you really have any leaning? No, it's a vertical line. Now here, you'll notice, is the x, let's say this x is a -2. Let's pretend this is a -2 on the x-axis. All right? And let's just talk about this. The y is changing. The y could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 100, and -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. But the x is not changing. So here we would say that there is a 0 change for x, and y is changing. So let's just pretend that number is 5. Well, in math, we know that you cannot divide by 0. It becomes then undefined. Undefined. Okay, so here slope does not exist for vertical lines. Another characteristic is when we have the opposite, where instead of a vertical line, we have one that goes this way. And here, the x is changing, so let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, and -1, -2. The x is changing, but the y is not. Let's say this is the point -2. So you end up with y, there being no change in y. No matter how far out you go, y is always staying the same. There's no change in y, and x is changing. So let's just pick a number in the sky. It could be anything. It doesn't matter because 0 divided by anything is equal to 0. So at x here, with this changing x and no changing y, we get a slope equal to 0. So you'll notice horizontal lines have a slope of 0, but vertical lines are undefined. Okay, so that is what we're talking about with slope. We'll go ahead and review. Slope. Usually you'll see slope in an equation as an m is equal to the change in y over the change in x, or rise over run. Or if you have 2 points, you can also express that as y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. These are all ways to think about slope. If it's leaning to the right, you're usually going to find it's positive. You lean to the left, it's negative. And horizontal lines, they have a 0 slope, and vertical lines, they are undefined. Thank you very much. If you need any more help, make sure you subscribe, and we'll see what we can do. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.